Okay, so the basic idea that I want to cover in this video um, has to do with religion and the concept of a useful lie, right? So it's essentially covering the idea that, um, how religion ties into and belief in a higher power or in a normative set of ethics that are, um, I guess, imbued with divine authority, um, how ultimately an argument raised for accepting religious beliefs as true come down to the idea that we should accept those beliefs as true because it is useful for us to believe that they are true. And they generate meaning in an individual's life when they are accepted as true, right? So it's essentially arguing that certain forms of self-deception are, if not essential for survival, improving of human life. And this is a pretty easy idea to digest. It's not really a radical proposition, but as I see it, it's flawed. It's flawed on a consequentialist basis. So the idea that we should accept something as true because it is beneficial for us to believe that it is true. In other words, to admit that there are useful lies that either contain truth or should be accepted as true because they're useful for us to believe that they are true, is another dangerous idea. Essentially, what accepting religious belief on the grounds that it's useful for us to believe that these things are true is to admit that there are useful lies. It's to admit that some amount of self-deception, if not necessary for survival, is beneficial to the individual. I think it goes without saying that there is danger in a justification for religion on the basis that it's simply beneficial for us to believe that it's true, or useful for us to believe that it's true, to accept a lie that might contain a truth but is not true in of itself. The problem with this, I see, is to admit that we should accept something because it amounts to a lie that is useful for us to believe as true, to me would encourage, implicitly, it would encourage people to recognize that certain lies are useful, which would encourage lying, would it not? I mean, to recognize, to say you should accept this belief because even if it is a lie, it's useful for you to believe it true. Does that not cause the individual to internalize the idea that it's at times useful to lie? And look, I mean, that's fine. It is useful to lie in many instances. But no, that dress doesn't make you look fat, right? I mean, there are many instances where it would be beneficial to engage in deception. But to tell people you should believe this true, even if it is a lie, because it's useful for you to believe that it's true, is to recognize the fact that there is moral legit that it is at times useful to lie, hence encouraging deception. So the connection is unstable, so I'm going to wait for it to improve. So essentially what I'm arguing is that on a consequentialist basis, accepting certain religious beliefs because they are useful lies causes individuals to conclude that it is at times useful to lie, hence encouraging, or thus encouraging deception, willful deception, right? So not just of others, but of oneself. So if it becomes useful to believe something is true, even if it's demonstrably false, because it generates meaning, or it improves life in difficult periods, or it becomes a kind of. So it's to admit that a certain level of self deception is a coping mechanism of some sort. And I don't think that's a ridiculous, I think that's obvious, but there is an implicit encouragement of deception and lying when we argue that one should accept a religious belief because it is a useful lie. It causes an individual to identify that there are such things as useful lies, thus encouraging lying, when the individual subjectively deems it useful. So it's very common for this argument to be raised that these types of beliefs should simply be accepted if they have if they're psychologically beneficial, even if false. So there are two problems here. One I've already identified. One, it's to admit that what you're arguing for is false, first of all, right? So even if it's false, having to grant that probably indicates that implicitly you've identified it as false, which if you've identified it as false implicitly, why advocate for the position? Secondly, as I said, accepting a belief because it's a useful lie encourages people to recognize that there are such things as useful lies, thus encouraging lying. So while the religion itself substantively may say that lying is a bad thing, the advocates for said religion, on the basis that it's a useful lie, end up encouraging lying in the process. It's a very interesting irony. And so, but then it also encourages something even more deeply problematic, which is that I should accept this would be good for me to believe true, so I should accept it as true, and then delude myself into thinking it's true, and then live in the light of the delusion of that thing being true. And then it's dangerous because that would also encourage individuals to construct. It's not ultimately it's regarded as a healthy coping mechanism to self-delude in that way, to believe that certain religious beliefs, believing that there is a higher power, believing there is a definite moral order, that there is an objective morality, that there is such a thing as good and evil and right and wrong, and that there is a purpose to human life, and that my actions are good and my life has meaning and I'm here on earth for a purpose, etc., etc., etc. Yes, if one questions any one of those things or rejects any one of those things, it can lead one into nihilism, but it doesn't have to, right? I mean, those that would atheism is criticized as as a generator of nihilism, and I don't think it necessarily has to be. I don't think atheism and nihilism go hand in hand, or that one will necessarily produce the other. Um, I think there is a secular narrative that, so as an atheist, I would say I don't believe that my life is without meaning, and I don't believe that I don't have a purpose in living, and I simply believe that I have the responsibility to generate that meaning and to create that purpose for myself. It's not to say atheism is not to say, oh, there is no purpose. Atheism is just the lack of a belief in a higher power. Well, Atheism is the lack of belief in a theic entity, as in a theistic being, right? Atheism, as in no theism, as in no theistic entity, as in no God, right? I mean, it's not much. There's not much to be said there, but generally, these two things, atheism and nihilism, are perceived to go hand in hand. I mean, I was watching the debate between Jordan Peterson and Matt Dillahunty, and essentially Peterson's argument against atheism is that atheists is that atheism produces nihilism, and nihilism produces disorder or suicide or other negative social and personal consequences. And I simply, his his argument seems to me to be charlatanry, or um, I feel like he's arguing in support. I feel like the position he's taking is more taken not because he believes it, but because he wants to preserve his reputation. To come out as an atheist or to admit that you don't believe there is a God is a reputation endangering act. And maybe that's what's motivating him. Although I don't think he's deceptive in that way. So maybe he genuinely believes, or at least thinks he genuinely believes what he's saying. I just don't think that I don't have the same nihilistic view of atheism. And I think that his view of atheism is very nihilistic in of itself. I think it's very pessimistic, and I think it's wrong-headed, and I think atheism is an extremely contained belief or disbelief, right? It's a specific type of disbelief. Being an atheist doesn't mean that you can't believe or don't believe in a higher power, depending on how you define that term. It just means that, generally speaking, you don't believe in a God. And so this idea that intelligence goes with pessimism, or that atheism goes with nihilism, and is, to me, wrong-headed and untrue. As an atheist, I find myself to be a very unnihilistic, unpessimistic person, even if there is some pessimism and nihilism and relativism inherent in my atheistic attitude. But I don't think that's a necessary consequence of being an atheist, and I don't think that it's proper to slander atheists by calling them nihilists, or to reduce that to associate a particular lifestyle with atheism is, to me, inappropriate. Oftentimes, I find that we can escape. Nihilism is not a necessary consequence of atheism, and nor is pessimism a necessary consequence of being objective or analytical. And there are different stories that we can tell ourselves, even as atheists and secularists and moral relativists, that are even hopeful or optimistic in their nature. And it's not that I don't believe in a purpose or in meaning. It's that I don't believe that either are supernaturally derived or come from a supernatural source. I think that they can come from. So being an atheist doesn't negate being spiritual. It doesn't preclude being spiritual. And there is a spirituality to be found in science and in truth and objectivity and in philosophy that are far deeper and more gratifying to the individual because they come closer to the truth. how could a lie be? How does that generate real meaning or purpose? And do some individuals simply not care about whether there's any reality in it? And to me, if there's no substance or reality in it, then there's no meaning or purpose in it, or there's no meaning in it at the very least. If there's not, there may be a purpose. But sorry, I've got a movie going. So these assumptions bother me. The problem is that, well, it's not actually a problem. Maybe there isn't a problem. Well, there is a problem with that. There's a problem with the discourse about atheism and what it means to be an atheist. And I think people that believe in God because they believe that it is simply a useful falsehood are really atheists. They're just closeted atheists, or they don't know that they don't want to admit that they're atheists. To be an atheist is not to. It's very interesting to me that there is this perception that being an atheist, an atheistic person, is less likely to be moral, right? I mean, the difference is that an atheist's ethics and aren't derived via compliance or. Here's the thing, right? So I can be good, but I am only truly good if I'm not obligated to be good, but I still act good, right? Improper grammar there, but it's actually a better word choice in the context of the sentence. I choose to be good because I value the good on a deeper level than just fearing what the consequences would be of committing the bad or doing something wrong, right? So in that sense, an atheist, a proper atheist, is actually capable of being truly good because the good acts that they'd commit, knowing that they aren't obligated to, knowing that we live in a morally relativistic universe, and knowing that there is no actual good or evil. Even thus, if a person with that framework acts virtuously, you could say that it is even there's a higher, there may be, well, I mean, if I don't exactly like throwing around these terms, but it's more virtuous because it's not mere virtue via force or fear. It's virtue because it's chosen, even acknowledging that it's not necessary or that one is under an obligation to be good, right? So people that are good simply because they fear the consequences of doing evil, can we really say that they're good? I mean, so yeah. And yeah. So I'm not exactly sure who the Wade person is. But hello, welcome. In any case, I'm basically talking about the fact that being an atheist doesn't deny one the ability to be spiritual. And that there is you could have a secular kind of spirituality. It's much less natural for, I guess, the everyday person to conceive of or get at, but you can certainly you can be a spiritual atheist. I mean, nothing prevents that. But it depends on what's meant by spirituality. I mean, often what spirituality amounts to is superstition, I feel. The sort of grassroots, non binary kinds of spiritualities that you find your indie spiritualities um, end up being kind of superstitious, like, crystals are somehow incorporated into certain kinds of spirituality. I don't know how. Thinking crystals have some sort of magic powers, and they give you health or whatever, and or it's just a form of magic essentially. And magic is very much a part of certain kinds of spirituality too. Um, and that's interesting. I mean, to me, magic and the occult and all of those forms of spirituality end up being a lot more interesting than some of the more conventional forms of spirituality, even though I do think they're invalid. Um, well, I can't just say they're all invalid. I'd have to look at each one individually. Um, but um, generally speaking, yeah, most forms of spirituality that I've encountered tend to just kind of be superstition. Crystals, magic. Yeah, so what I mean by magic is like Wicca or other pagan traditions. People that have rejected in the past historically, people they've they've rejected like traditional religion, and they've gone for other kinds of spirituality and sources of meaning in their lives or purpose. So magic is one of these other forms of spirituality and religion, and people think that they can derive they can with magic. It's not just trying to find truth outside of religion. It's a little bit more than that. It's very ritualistic, but it's a way for people to find control over their environment through superstition, in the same way that religion provides control and stability for people. Um, and so people that have turned to magic in the past, I'm talking like Wicca or other pagan types of practices, where, um, yeah, I suppose all that I mean by magic are like um, ritualistic traditions, that focus on, um, well, yeah, not even necessarily like spell work, but they're traditions based on like ritualistic practices that somehow provide some benefit, um, even though they're not rational. Now, something that can't be explained by now. I don't think that now. I mean, it depends on what you mean by magic, right? So you asked the right question. Magic, I just mean as kind of a non-mainstream, right? Um, you know, ritualistic kind of tradition practice where you're trying to derive. It's like a supernatural, superstitious thing where you're trying to understand the universe or gain control and clarity in life with ritual and things of that nature. Um, and all that seems very primitive to me. But yeah. Oh yeah, right. So I mean, here's the thing. I mean, yeah, it depends on words are very elastic, and they have very flexible. They're very flexible in terms of how you might use them. So when I'm using the term magic, I'm talking about a specific form of spirituality and tradition. What you're talking about, yeah, there's magic everywhere, right? I mean, many things in science are very magical, but it's the difference between something merely being magical and something being magic, because um, yeah, what your transistors, chips, lasers, all of those things have a they have all of the qualities of what we would call magic, right? And they're a very scientific thing. Um, they're a very real thing, I mean, right? So it's a form of real magic, but it just depends on how you use the word magic. TVs are magic, and Um, you could point to a bunch of other basic things that are very real and have a lot of substance to them that you could call magical. But what I mean by magic is not something merely being magical in that sense. Magic is I'm referring to like ritualistic practices when I'm talking about magic, like Wicca or other pagan traditions. But yeah, all of those things that you list are very magical in their own right. And the universe itself is very magical, right? I mean, we're on a floating rock orbiting a star in the middle of a void of space, and there are planets and other worlds, and I mean, yeah, all that's very magical, but it's not exactly the sense in which I use the word magic. But crystals definitely have power, you say. Interesting. Um, See, you connected it back to crystals, right? So, yeah, crystals, right? So, I mean, the use of crystals. I'm not talking about crystals in the sense of being used in transistors, chips, or lasers, or any of the other things that you might list. Talking about crystals, like believing that crystals have magical properties to them. That if you ally yourself with a specific crystal, you wear it around your neck, or you use it in other form of ritual, you can derive power from it of some kind. Um, that's the kind of crystal use that I'm talking about. But yes, crystals and other elements definitely have their powers in them that we can exploit and use in very real and substantive ways. But the use of crystals for other purposes, like crystal use that I'm talking about, like believing that wearing I'm not exactly sure what types of crystals they use. Um, you know, if I wear this around my neck, it's going to, as a turn it into a necklace, wear around my neck all the time. I'm going to have a better life because of it. I don't think they have properties like that. What if ritual was done, worked, but nobody knew, and years later science explained why it worked? Well, I mean, you could look at any number of. I'm not saying that all ritual is. It depends on how you use the word ritual. Um, there are many things that are totally, I mean, like the scientific method could be considered a kind of. It's not a ritual. Okay, no, I don't. I actually don't think that word is as flexible as I said. By ritual, um, I mean that in the context of magic, spirituality, and superstition, um, and other primitive ways of trying to control reality or understand it. And magic in the past was a way for people to, through ritual, derive comfort and a kind of truth, maybe even a bit of control, or not probably not real control, not real truth. But to them, it felt good to engage in ritual, and it seemed to be meaningful, and so it provided them with some kind of, you know, uh, benefit. Now, you ask, what if a ritual was done, worked, but nobody knew why, and years later science explained why it worked? Well, in that case, you'd be hard pressed to find, I mean, I would be hard pressed to find rituals in the sense that I mean, like um, spiritualistic rituals. You'd be hard pressed to find any number of those that actually seem to work in the way they thought they did. Now, for instance, an example of a ritual is sacrifice, right? So people used to sacrifice animals, for instance, to the gods, or they thought that burning the animal, killing and burning the animal, or using its blood in some way would release something, or would have some other. It was a kind of magic by which they attempted to appease the gods or appease the world or the universe or whatever. And obviously, that's very primitive. I mean, well, I mean, from them, it wasn't primitive. To their perspective, it was totally valid. They had nothing else to go on, right? I mean, they had no science. Um, they have none of the data or the knowledge or the experience that we did. So to them, now, yeah, maybe they thought we eat these animals, and so we derive nutrition and sustenance from them, and so there must be powers in them that keep us going. And so by burning the animal, killing and burning the animal, you provide the same sustenance to the gods or whatever. And I don't know. I mean, at one time that was perfectly logical for them because they had nothing else to go on. But what if natural crystals can heal, but we haven't studied it scientifically yet? Um, I don't know if we have studied it scientifically. I'm not exactly sure what research has been done specifically into like crystals per se. I mean, crystals are just a specific rock formation, and they develop under specific conditions. Crystals are just something that humans found cool in their environment. Like, you come upon a crystal, you're like, the fuck is that thing? A caveman coming upon a crystal, it's like, the fuck is that? It's like no other rock he's seen. It's like no other element or anything else he's seen. So he assumes that it's got magical powers or something. Um, do you believe that Japanese clear water and change the structure of the water by doing so? Oh yeah, I've heard those studies. Like if you talk nicely to a plant, it will grow better or something like that. Yeah, I don't particularly know how those studies were conducted or under what conditions whether they were controlled. And I, I'm not exactly sure whether any of those are valid because I haven't looked deeply enough into them. But I would say that the idea that you could change the structure of right. So I don't know the whole water. You said change the structure of water. Um, what do you mean by change the structure of water? Water doesn't even have a structure. That's the nature of the element. Is that it doesn't have a it's it's fluid. It's not a solid, so it doesn't really have a structure to it. Not exactly sure what you mean. Um, Japanese author, pseudoscientist, a human consciousness could affect the molecular structure of water. In what way, though? Like, if you're changing the molecular structure of water, it's no longer water. It'd be hydrogen or oxygen. So, I'm not sure what you mean by change the structure of water. As far as I know, the only way that you can change water is by boiling it, in which case you turn it into a gas, or you freeze it, in which case you create a solid. So, what about, I believe, but if true ritual magic, yeah, um, right. I just don't think that any of the ritual magics that I would be talking about really meet any rigorous kind of criteria for validity. So, applying a rigorous criteria of validity, you wouldn't really readily be able to. We I'm willing to grant that rituals had a psychological benefit for people, but not that they actually resulted in any physical change on the material to the material world, um, in any deeper supernatural mystical sense. But you'd have to point to specific rituals because talking about these things in generalities like that actually ends up being pretty difficult. But generally speaking, like for sacrifice, I gave an example of a ritual that people used to engage in. Animal sacrifices is one where you can't really demonstrate that there was any actual appeasement of the gods, right? I mean, maybe, right? I mean, maybe we could conduct similar rituals. Let's say that me and you go out into the woods, or we go out into the world, and we encounter a hurricane or a tornado. Let's say we encounter a tornado or something like that, and we go with the ritual method, and we say we're going to take this goat, we're going to slaughter the goat, and then we're going to burn the goat, we're going to sacrifice the goat to make the tornado stop, to appease the gods and to make the tornado stop. Do you think that by doing that, in the context of that the tornado would stop because of this is a correlation versus. So the significance of rituals in people's minds comes from a confusion between correlation and causation, where yeah, the tornado might stop, but it could also simply be because tornadoes are short-lived or any number of other rational explanations. Um, so sacrifice is one such ritual, primitive. I won't call them primitive, but I will just call them mystical. And they are what they are. But um, frequency signals from the mind. Now, that is more interesting. We could get into that, but um, how mind might shape reality is what you're saying. Um, or alter it. I mean, clearly mind alters reality all the time. I mean, I pick up my remote, I've levitated the device, right, off the table or the floor, right? So it's technically suspended in midair right now. My mind is doing that. It's just doing it through my limbs. So, and then if I drop it, well, gravity takes it back down. So, in a way, my mind is altering reality in that sense, and it does it all the time. Every time I alter my environment, the mind is the thing doing that. As humans alter their environment, the mind's what's doing it, because the mind is what is the source of all human action. So, I mean, but it doesn't, I don't believe it alters reality. I mean, in a very literal sense, that humans take action through the mind, having minds, acting as the result of what they think, and right. So that is mind affecting reality, but not in the sense that you mean. Um, you mean now? Yeah, I mean, we could also get into the mind having other mysterious. I mean, there are about 1,000 things. Well, I don't want to give a specific number because I'm sure that there are 1,001 things, or maybe even just 999. Um, Amazing things that the mind can do. I mean, we're all conscious right now, and we're all thinking about things, and that's pretty amazing. And uh, humans can do a bunch of cool things with their minds, and so that's the mind having incredible abilities. But I don't think that we can necessarily, like, for instance, see into the future, because if there is a fixed future, that negates free will. It indicates that we function according to determinism, and that events they're fixed, how they're occurring. So yeah, but again, having said all of that, we're only mind affecting reality in the sense that you mean. I probably don't believe in. I just mean mind affects reality all the time in the sense that humans alter their environment, and humans act through their mind, through their thinking, into action, which alters the environment. The original source of that is the mind, but it's not it's not mind altering reality in the sense that you mean. Now, that brings us into a whole other different topic of how the mind can do things, like maybe can do weird things that seem to be not certainly not supernatural. Yeah, the mystical properties and the abilities of the mind do not prove the supernatural, and nothing really that you've presented proves the supernatural in any way, respectfully. But we could play around with how we define the terms that we're using, and then have fun discussing the implications of how those terms are defined. But we can't really prove the supernatural with any of that. But I do respect your input for sure. Cool. Yeah. So you know, um, all that seems very, yeah. So I don't know. I'm a pretty hard empiricist, and uh, I'm not an actual credentialed scientist, but I'm more scientific and less inclined to believe in anything, and I'm more inclined to just. But here's the thing, right? I don't believe that certain things, simply because consensus tells me that they're false, that I should then accept them as false. I won't take that approach. Having the arrogant approach where it's like, oh well, that's just an inferior idea, so I'll just reject it. I'm willing to totally discuss the merits of the idea on a logical basis. I'm not just going to dismiss them because consensus tells me I should. But most things of that nature, we could probably dismiss if we're talking about a specific thing, because again, I don't like speaking in generalities. It's difficult. Anyway, so yeah, the original topic of the video, I was only trying to discuss the dangers of believing in useful lies and how that enables individuals um, to make up shit and delude themselves for the sake of coping, but ultimately it can produce very dangerous delusions, which very much compromise the safety and the well-being of the individual and society as a consequence. So, um, yeah, I'm not exactly sure what the title of this one was. I have to check back in so that I make sure I'm staying on point. But yeah, you can pose more questions if you want. That would be interesting. Um, uh, anyway, so yeah, those are my thoughts on whether we should accept things as lies, but useful lies, and whether that's a dangerous way of thinking, which probably it does become that. Now, you could argue that is it really well, people do it all the time. How could it be dangerous? Things seem stable. Yeah, things seem stable, right? Because they ultimately will self-correct, or we've progressed to a point where we can contain. Um, welcome back. Um, yeah. So yeah, but the original topic was the video was of the video was on the idea of whether we should accept a religious belief, because we recognize that even if it is a lie, that it's a useful thing to believe is true. In other words, a useful lie that we can then use to beneficially delude ourselves and to cope with the realities of life by believing in such things, because things end up being too complicated or distressing if we don't accept the lie as truth. Interestingly, I don't think it has much significance either way, because the idea is that atheism leads to nihilism, which leads to chaos, both personal and societal. And no one of those things is a necessary condition for the other. So, or a natural or necessary consequence for the other. So, yeah, I mean, atheism producing nihilism, it's, certainly not a bad um, assumption. Well, it's an understandable assumption, but it's still a bad assumption. There are many things that end up being very understandable, but are still, we would agree, are bad. Um, Something being understandable does not make it right. There are many cases in which people act, and it's like, oh, that's totally understandable that he would do that, but it doesn't make it right from an ethical or logical perspective. That God exists. Now I can prove that what God is. Some kind of advanced technology running a simulation is weird. Oh, I mean, you're actually getting to something I've been thinking about quite a lot lately, actually. I mean, it depends on what you mean by God, and it depends on what your view of reality is. And yeah, I mean, if you just view God as whatever higher civilization is running the simulation that we're operating in, well, then I would say that that's one of the better definitions of God, and actually something that, while speculative, is more compelling than the traditional supernatural definitions of the term. Experiment and the aliens that made me believe in God? No idea. Um, well, even if they wanted you to believe in something, here's the thing. It's for authorities and people trying to preserve their power, it's sometimes very good for the masses of people to believe certain things because it constrains how they act. So you have to distinguish between what it wants you to believe and what you should believe. Because if it's simply what it wants you to believe, that's not a reason for you to believe it. It's just what it wants you to believe. Um, it doesn't necessarily have benevolent reasons for you to believe that. It could just be manipulating you. Um, I meant I can't prove that God is. Yeah, you can't prove it, but your definition of God is probably one of the better formats, as you put it. Um, that is a good. That's a good format. You put it well. Uh, other supernatural definitions of the term, him just being some mystical, timeless, infinite, loving, benevolent, perfect, all-knowing being, I mean, is less believable. But it just being an advanced simulation running civilization or whatever that we're a part of. Now, I have a view of simulation theory which is a little bit different maybe than what how other people would think about it. I don't believe that I ultimately have concluded that I don't think that we are in a simulation. I can't conclude that with absolute certainty. It's just it's the conclusion that I would be more comfortable accepting with with the evidence that I have, right? So if I can imagine that something is logical, that's one thing. But even if we can imagine that something is theoretically valid or logical, that does not necessarily mean that we should believe it. There are many things that are perfectly logical, if formatted and framed the proper way, that we shouldn't believe in because we have to be constrained by evidence. So if the evidence is only theoretical, then I don't see an evidence in motive or reason necessarily. It's an interesting speculation, but it's not. I don't really know what evidence would be valid to prove that, or what evidence. I would only have anecdotal evidence, and being constrained by a need for evidence, I can't accept it as true. I just don't feel I have enough valid evidence. I have a lot of invalid evidence. But in any case, on the topic of us being in a simulation, I would think of a simulation being run for the purpose of, because the question arises, if we're in a simulation, why? Why are we in a simulation? For what reason would they be running a simulation like this? In a reality where human beings are conscious and can feel pain and are living in an imperfect world. And the thing is, so they're evil in that sense, right? Because there's evil in the world. They created the evil through the simulation and then exposed humans to it, knowing that we're designed to react with sensitivity to those sorts of things. Yeah, I mean, the problem of evil then leads me to think that they would then not really have morality, human morality, and would be a sort of ends justifying means kind of. So the problem of evil, if we assume that a simulation is being run in the sense that you mean, indicates that they either are evil, which is less likely, or they just have morality that differs from ours, making them seem evil. They just adhere to a different moral code, where ends justify means, and that there is a greater good, even if there is some evil that some individuals feel or are exposed to. There is a greater good at stake in the simulation and the world that they're running, and that the ends justify the means. Even if evil in this sense, in this simulation, should be conceived as a means of some kind to a greater end. And whether you are of the persuasion that ends can justify means is another question that would depend on your attitude about things. And if you believe that there is a utilitarian greater good that individuals can then be sacrificed for, then, okay, in any case, my view of what a simulation would be run for, why would they run a simulation? Because they're trying to test out, in this sense, human beings in the simulation would then be like, why would you make beings conscious in a simulation? Well, you do it because if you can run this simulation and you create an infinite number of hypothetical worlds, you're running a simulation to figure out as much about those worlds as possible and as much about those realities as possible, so that then you can take all of the data derived from the simulation, so that then you can construct a world that is not like any of the worlds that went wrong or broke down in the simulation. So you can derive knowledge from a simulation like that. And humans, in that sense, we're just we're conscious minds within the simulation that are collecting data and insights, and then those who run the simulation are extracting all that information all the insights and all the data and all the knowledge from, right. So that's our role in that simulation. We're just here to learn on their behalf about all the hypothetical worlds they're creating and running, and trying to figure out what social systems work and whatnot. Now, there are so many holes in that, and that would be my way of trying to create some original way of original form of like simulation theory. But I don't believe that we are in a simulation. But I think it's an interesting idea. Maybe we are choosing. Yeah, but there are definitely a lot of pain that we're exposed to that we do not choose. Um, or that individuals even choose to inflict upon us or create through their inaction or misaction. Yeah, if pain is temporary, then that doesn't. Well, I mean, there's certain people are exposed to very extreme. I mean, we just have the ability as humans to look at pain abstractly and to say, "Oh, well, it's it's a good thing. It has a purpose," and so we can escape it. Whereas other beings, yeah, but there are certain forms of physical pain that you can't do that with. Burning alive or being exposed to any severe physical pain, that's can't as easily rationalize your way around the idea that God is good, knowing that some people have experienced that, if a God exists. Yeah, well, it would just be pain and evil would be means to an end, which I don't see what end they would serve effectively or why they would be necessary. But Schopenhauer had this idea, this question that he raised, that he asked if um, what is to be preferred, existence or non-existence? And he was a pessimist. I don't know. What do you think about that? I mean, we can't even talk about non-existence because non-existence is its own type of existence. Um, Nothing is technically something. Um, it's at least a concept in our minds, although it's certainly, I don't know. There are paradoxes there that I'm not exactly sure how to get around. Um, yeah, I don't think that there. I don't know. I worry about. I find the afterlife, the notion of an afterlife, a very dangerous idea because then individuals have they feel like they can just pass time rather than use time. So I've always focused on like, should I just be trying to pass time right now, or should I be trying to use my time? Of course, I end up just passing the time or using it unproductively anyway. But like, when you begin to accept that, oh, I'll have an afterlife, or I'll live infinitely, or uh, I'll have a better existence than I had in this life, it enables you to not do the work that you need to do to make your existence in this life better. And then you start living as if you're immortal, which is irrational in my view, because the evidence is that we are very mortal. Um, and there's no evidence for an afterlife outside of our desire for there to be one. So that's what I would say to that. Um, the measure of pain would be, yeah, the measure of pain would be relative to the lack of pain once it is past. Yeah, but that doesn't negate the fact that in the moment, yeah, after the pain happens, you only have the memory of the pain, which is very much less severe than the pain, but it can leave impress. It can well, PTSD is an example of when pain an individual is exposed to so much pain that they break down, and that um, the pain permanently damages them. So pain is not just a to be viewed as a a non-issue because it's past or anything like that. It certainly was an issue when it was passing. So yeah, the idea that I think what you're trying to do there is say that there you're trying to put pain within, you're trying to reconcile the problem of evil, a part of which is um, the problem of how, I guess, pain is inflicted on humans by life, by forces outside of their control. You're trying to reconcile that with your belief in a God, which is fine, or you're at least trying to reconcile. You're at least trying to show that one does not disprove or negate the other necessarily, which is fine. But it ultimately it's dangerous to think that way, because then it's like, well, then you can you can flagrantly expose individuals to real pain, and then post hoc justify it as some sort of meaningful experience when it was really just suffering. The more emotional pain, the more depth. Maybe, but there's a point of diminishing returns there. So you're asking, the more emotional pain experience, the more depth of compassion. There is a point of diminishing returns, though, there, because pain, if severe enough, can drive people into madness or psychopathy. So I could just as easily argue that, right? I mean, you see the kinds of guys that end up in prison. It's like, yeah, these guys, they were exposed to some real shit, and they're not evil; they're just damaged, and life was unkind to them. But that is, yeah, I don't really believe people end up becoming truly evil. Maybe some people are, depending on how you would define evil, right? I mean, what I mean by evil is just malicious, right? So malicious and destructive of the self and others, and purely self-interested, and being self-interested is fine. I mean malice, right? I don't like using the term evil because I don't like using labels like that. But we're talking about an ethical issue here, so you're naturally going to have to implicate those terms, as clunky as they are. But yes, yes, but certainly, right? I mean, a certain amount of pain can cause an individual to have more compassion, and I could see how that could work. I could see that there being a mechanism of action there where it would result in more empathy, but it could just as easily result in less. It just depends on how the individual interprets it. Therefore, I don't think it's a proper mechanism of making individuals more compassionate, nor do I think it should be used as a tool for that purpose. It's a dangerous one to use. Well, children should not be exposed to pain for sure. Oh, yeah. I mean, children. Oh, God, yes. I mean, I, could draw on anecdotes, but it goes as a general statement. Clinical psychologists would probably largely agree that pain is genuinely not a good thing for children to, especially deprivation. So kids are very harmed by any kind of deprivation, especially, at least from what I understand. I mean, right now, I'm just kind of spitting out ideas, but kids, I mean, I know, like, social deprivation, for one thing, will just kill an infant. It will literally biologically end the existence of an infant if it doesn't receive any affection from its mother. It doesn't have to be the biological mother, but from its guardian. It will die. So, or at least it would be very damaged in the process, or go through a great deal of pain, which would damage it. And yeah, so I know that, I don't know if, I mean, maybe I'm making too big a statement there. You could do your research on that. In fact, I would want to pull up an article so that I could support that. But maybe like the idea of like deprivation of affection for infants. Lack of physical affection, actually. So apparently, according to Psychology Today, lack of physical affection can actually kill babies, but touch is even more vital than this. So it's touch, really, is what I mean. I need to use a more precise word there. Babies who are not held, nuzzled, or hugged enough can stop growing, and if the situation lasts long enough, even die. Can, right? Didn't say will, but I get your point, right? Serial killers, child abusers may be victims of a lack of affection and compounded. Oh, God, yeah, I agree. Serial killers, child abusers may be victims of a lack of affection and compounded with abuse. Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, people genuinely don't really become evil, they're just damaged. So Um, uh, I would agree that all of those things could change a person, and cause them to act out, um, in ways that we would not regard as morally ideal. But well, most people would regard as morally ideal. You know, we're throwing around normative labels here, and there are limitations there. But regardless, I get your point, and I would probably agree with you. Although you could find many exceptions where individuals are exposed to a great deal of both abuse and lack of affection and other traumatic developmental experiences that become perfectly normal, functional people. You know, that's certainly possible as well, depending on how you define functional and normal. And whether anyone can be normal is another question. If normal even exists is the question. Probably does. You break down the word normal, right? The root word there is norm. So a person, if they're normal, they adhere to norms, and there are such things as norms. Therefore, there's such a thing as normal. No, I wouldn't be able to. No, I'm not good at, like, I could direct you to the Facebook page of someone I think is a serial killer, and you could analyze his posts. Um, no, I wouldn't be good at it. You couldn't predict, like, whether an individual becomes like a. I know what you mean, though. People have patterns; they function according to patterns. So, um, yeah, there could be behaviors that are indicative. A present or past behavior could be indicative of a future behavior. Not a bad inference, but maybe not a good inference, depending on what future behaviors you're predicting. Serial killers. So you mentioned a serial killer specifically, right? So we're really getting off on topics that are totally unrelated to. But I think this all speaks to. I'm trying to tie it back to the original topic of the video. Got to make sure that I do that, because otherwise the tangents will be infinite and it won't even make sense as a video, as a single video anyway. How would this connect back to what the topic was on religion and the utility of a lie, all that stuff, and thought crime? I mean, we could definitely go off on tangents. That's fine. Um, but in any case, you mentioned a serial killer. You know, that is a very extreme manifestation of. That's a very extreme case. Anyone who becomes so they're not only a killer, right? They are a serial killer. So they kill on a regular basis, right? I mean, in a series, serial meaning series, meaning multiple killings, and that. Oh yeah, true crime. I know. Yeah, yeah. It was thought crime. Oh yeah. Okay. So, but not a tangent, right? You pulled me into a tangent that ended up actually being. It would have been relevant if. Yeah, I know. It says thought crime. Um, but yeah, the whole idea of a serial killer is terrifying. That someone could, especially a psychopathic one, which usually what you're talking about is a psychopath when you're talking about a serial killer, someone who does it maliciously and intentionally. Although it doesn't have to be malicious, but certainly killing without malice is a rare case. If you're going to do that, you need something to motivate you to do something that serious. Malice would be one of the only effective motivators there. Can't think of a better one. Anyway, no, I was talking about thought crime. Okay, so I have to ask a question, right? Since you're pretty active on this live chat. Is there such a thing as a crime in thought, or can you only have crime in action? Can you have a crime? Can someone commit a crime in thought? Or can they only commit crime in action? Either moral or otherwise, right? So I'm talking about moral crimes here. Not, yeah, so you can't commit a legal crime in thought, but you can commit a moral crime. So can you commit a moral crime in thought? or can you only commit a moral crime in action? Certainly you can't commit a legal crime in thought. The Bible implies thought, that certain thought is a crime. Yeah, but the Bible is a compendium of thoughts. If the Bible says that thought is a crime, it is invalidating itself. But I get your point. Yeah, but I don't think that you can have a crime in thought. I don't think that that's a valid way of applying the term crime to thought. I don't think that you can have a crime. I don't think that you can commit a crime, either moral or legal, in thought. Now, most people are going to adhere to norms, and so they're not going to commit crimes in thought. They're not going to imagine horrible things, right? I just don't think that a crime in thought should be conceived of, that there is such a thing. Only in action. The importance of that is, well, there is importance in that, right? Because the moment that you say that there is such a thing as a crime of thought, then you can regulate thought, in which case the government can engage in control of speech and thought, which would be very, very, very bad. And religion tries to engage in regulation and control of thought all the time, which is equally bad. Yeah, I did. The Minority Report. No, I'm not sure if I did. Yeah. No, I think individuals can think whatever they want in their heads, regardless of how bad it is. And I mean, and I only say that because I'm trying to protect a principle at stake, which is that thought is an inviolable thing, and it can't be regulated or controlled in any substantive way. Yeah, right. Yeah, and I'm not saying that that one should. I'm not. This isn't a prescriptive statement. I'm not saying that one should engage in crimes in thought. I mean, it didn't say that, right? I mean, all that I mean is that one can, and there's no way to regulate that, and nor should it be regulated because it's all hypothetical, right? We sometimes, when answering moral questions, have to imagine horrible things, right? In one class I took at college, like, you know, even to engage, so like I took a class about, like, we asked questions like, why is murder wrong? Why is rape wrong? Why is, abuse wrong? And we had to answer these hard questions. And it's like, you've got to think about some extremely serious and really devastating and horrible things when you're trying to answer those questions. And if you can't think about those things, then you can't answer the questions. I mean, you can't think if you can't offend in your thinking, or even hypothetically, you see the point. I mean, I don't know. This goes into free speech too, and freedom of thought is an obvious thing that needs to be. Speech is attached to that, which is understandable. People got arrested for thought crimes in that movie. Thank God I was only in a movie and that it wasn't in real life. But the Minority Report, that sounds like it's based on a real life event. So I don't know. I haven't. Maybe, let me look it up. Actually, I won't ask you for all the details. Minority Report. It's a 2002 film. That seems a lot older than I thought it would be. All right. I'm just going to read a little bit of a synopsis here, so that it's a neo-noir science fiction action film, and it's Stevens. It looks like a good movie. Got good casting. It's a Steven Spielberg one. That looks. The cast. Wow, this seems to be one of a pretty sophisticated movie, actually. Anyway, I'll read all that later. Yeah. And that's the problem with religion, is that it makes people think that they're being surveilled in the way they think. If you think God's listening to your every thought, that he knows your heart, and that he knows what's going on in your mind, then you're constantly under a feeling of being surveilled, in which case you can't think. So it's That's the danger of thinking that there are such things as crime in thought, which there are none, right? Well, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm just being definitive and stating my opinion. I mean, you could take it or leave it. You can disagree or agree. That's um, but um, anyway, so that's kind of the topic that I wanted to cover was the idea the whether lies can be useful, which they can be very personally useful depending on, and also one thing I was thinking about, which um, Wade, you can central theme is the question of free will versus determinism, and examines whether free will can exist if the future is set and known in advance. Exactly, exactly, yeah. And I said that earlier. That if the future is determined in advance, then we can't have any free will, right? Because our actions then have to be determined for the future to be determined. Therefore, if our actions are predetermined, we don't have free will. Um, so you could access hypothetical futures, maybe, depending on how string theory works and timelines work, but you couldn't, you'd need a device for that that's astronomically beyond human knowledge at this point. Touches upon. Yeah, yeah, I think I would enjoy it. I think I would enjoy watching that one. Yeah, I'll put that on my list. I'm watching Interstellar right now. I'm not actually watching it. It's on in the background. I'm watching it again. I like this one. Um, I like some of this movie. This one is has parts of it that are a little bit cringeworthy, but most of it's a pretty good, pretty well done. Um, the good thing about the issues that you raise is this gives me ideas for a future live stream that I might want to do on free will and determinism, and how the idea of there being a fixed future is and that events are predetermined then negates the idea of free will. So that's kind of interesting. But mostly because I don't know if you were here at the beginning of the video where I explained that if you say that you should accept a religious belief because it's useful to believe it, even if it's a lie, that encourages people to recognize that there are such things as useful lies, which encourages lying. I don't know what you think about that. Contradicting the substance, the content of the religion, which is that lying is a bad thing if we're talking about Christianity, or really any major religion, which would probably say that. In the real world where these types of moral systems don't actually exist, we have to examine, make the really difficult choices in our everyday life. Like, if I have to lie in this situation, if I'm forced to almost, like, does this dress make me look fat? Like, what am I supposed to say? If it's, well, that's a ridiculous example. That's a stupid example, but you get the point. It's the best example from everyday conversation that we could pull on, where it's probably advantageous to you to lie in that situation because you don't want to offend your girlfriend. But is it right? I mean, that's the issue, I guess. And I don't know. I mean, that's you could come up with about 100 different. Yeah. That's interesting that you raised that. That you make that statement. I think that it's definitely arrogant. I agree to make definitive statements and then to do so without acknowledging the limitations of the statement. I don't know if it's necessarily arrogant in every case. It may just be that the person is making assumptions that they seem reasonable, non-arrogant. I mean, but that's not the issue. I get your point. I mean, the yeah, like, yeah, there are certainly there are things that I think that we can know if we've defined what we're talking about precisely, and the conclusion has proven its reliability over time. But yeah, making truth statements is a difficult is very difficult. Well, that's the thing, is you have to question whether ants even have understanding to begin with, you know, and whether I mean, we're just evolved primates. I mean, tall, lanky, hairless primates, so I don't know. I would struggle to answer questions about whether we can. I mean, I think it's a very difficult question to answer the question, can we know? And then what are the limits of our knowledge? I think, again, it would depend on the context and what you're talking about. And maybe we can't know with 100% certainty, but we can still, if not develop true perfect knowledge, we can develop likely to be accurate postulations about things, if not knowledge of the truth. I don't know. I mean, yeah, sure. I would agree. Yeah. I mean, the idea that, I don't know if you've read Flatland or heard of Flatland, but it's the idea that what is a two-dimensional being? It knows what it knows about the dimensions it lives in. We're a three-dimensional being, but we can imagine that there are four dimensions too, four-dimensional things like a tesseract, in which case we can't perceive in four dimensions. We can imagine it, we can't perceive it, nor do we exist in four dimensions. So yeah, I would agree that there are limits to what we can know. I completely agree. There are very huge limitations with what we think is knowledge. But do you think that we can know what we don't know? And if, well, we can't really know what we don't know, right? Because if we don't know, then we can't know. But um, in certain instances, we can know what we don't know. Um, in this instance, when we're talking about ultimate things and the universe and then the causes of reality and everything else, it becomes much more difficult to say what we don't know. Because if you don't know, right, then we can't know. And so I agree, there are huge limits with what we can say with 100% certainty. But those are very general statements. Yeah. It depends on whether you are a person that is willing to grant that we actually know things, which is entirely a matter of your particular philosophical attitude. No, I mean, maybe they could. I mean, it depends. I mean, we can't really know how other animals think. This is another thing. This goes off on a bit of a tangent too. They may not just act on instinct or impulse. I mean, certain animals may actually do problem solving and stuff like that. So they may look not smart to us, but that's mostly because they can't speak. A lot of what makes humans seem smart is we have all these intricate language. We have intricate language, and other animals don't have that. So they can't. They may have concepts and everything and knowledge. They just can't distill it into words or speech. So I do like thinking about that, though. In any case, are rat can't know about space travel. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a safe assumption. I mean, likely a rat doesn't know that it's living on a planet in a solar system, in the galaxy, in the universe. It has no need for that kind of knowledge. It didn't evolve to know those kinds of things. It wasn't evolutionarily beneficial for it to have knowledge and consciousness like that. But it may know very well the maze that it lives in. Yeah, right. They definitely engage in problem solving. And I mean, spiders build traps, and webs are traps, right? But birds build tools, and apes build tools, and they adapt in ways that suggest they actually have problem solving. Yeah. The difference is that we can we know that our knowledge is limited, and we can at least admit that and know that we don't know, right? So that's a form of knowledge. We can know that we don't know. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, we didn't evolve, right? I mean, we have a lot of consciousness, and we can understand the physical world that we live in and the universe and like the laws that govern it, but we don't, I mean, yeah, we don't exist in 4 dimensions, for instance, if anything even can, if there's any sort of form of biological life that could. I don't have enough, I don't have enough research in physics to be able to explain to you what 4 dimensions even looks like. No, I won't even try to explain it. But the point is, going back to the main topic of the video, there is a reality beyond the human moral and philosophical systems. That there is a reality beyond religion, in a sense. We have very provincial ideas about how we should act and the world that we live in, because there are views about life and the world are shaped by those religious systems. But there's an entire there's an entire universe beyond that human religious systems don't even take into account. I mean, the Bible doesn't say anything about the universe on the physical level. I mean, I don't think the Quran does either. I don't think that I think even in the Bible, it goes on a geocentric understanding of the universe, that all of it revolves around the earth. And it's a very human-centric way of viewing things. In the Christian Bible, and then so am I able to add you to your stream? I am not sure. I would love to. I don't know how to do that. I haven't been using YouTube, the YouTube Studio app long enough to be able to do something like that. It's actually an interesting. The app is not totally intuitive in some of its features, if that makes any sense. So, yeah, but you can. So yeah, if you subscribe to the channel, okay. So I have to explain the context behind the name of the channel. My friends and I tried to do a podcast a while back where we would just talk about different things together, and then try to have a multi-person discussion about things, because that leads to like more perspectives, and so that's better than just monologuing, and it's more helpful for other people to think about things when it's not just one person putting their perspective in there. Although I do try to come at things with thinking in different colors, if that makes sense, or at least trying to debate with myself about them. But in any case, the point is that we tried to do that podcast. That's the name of the channel. And the podcast failed because we just stopped doing it. We just got lazy. We just stopped making the podcast. But that's the name. That's the name. So you could subscribe to that, and then basically what we can do is I can basically what I can do is you can subscribe to the channel, and then when I go live, like the next time I go live or sometime in the future, I can have figured out how to add people to the stream if that's possible. And then once I have that knowledge, then I can add you in the future. So that works. It's probably easy to do. You know, I can even look it up. Yeah, actually, you can add people to your stream. So it says, but it's a little bit vague. It says, while it may not look that way at first glance, the good news is adding a guest to YouTube Live is possible. In fact, you can add more than one. You just need the right tools to do the job. So that indicates to me that it's not built into the Studio app. And I'll probably have to download another app to be able to do that too. But yeah, so it says, in this video, we look at the best options to go live on YouTube with 2 or more people, including, and the process you need to, I'm just reading the instructions. Yeah, so you need a specific type of gear, it looks like, to do that. And, you know, to a live stream, it's like, it'd be interesting, you know, you'd have to merge live streams from multiple channels, it almost feels like. Because on YouTube, it's weird. You don't have, you know, on YouTube, you don't have an account, you have a channel. And I get that that's kind of the point of the application, that everyone is empowered to create and to put stuff on YouTube, and that's the whole point of YouTube. I mean, it's essentially like as revolutionary as the printing press in terms of all the information that you can access that way, in terms of aiding information accessibility. So it's actually fairly, it looks like you have to have, so yeah, you'd have to merge live streams, you streaming live and me stream, you'd have to merge them from 2 separate channels, it looks like, or at least that's the only way that you'd be able to do it through this app. But trying to think about the mechanics of how you'd go about doing that. You could do basically what you'd have to do is you'd have to do like live interviews. So it would have to be both of us going live from separate. Well, yeah, it would be a live interview, but you'd have to go through another. Yeah, basically what you would do is the same way that we did our podcast. So yeah, really getting the information on how to do it would be very easy, because I would just ask my friend how we did it last time. We do it the same way. So that'd be fine. It wouldn't be as seamless and easy as just merging a live stream from 2 separate YouTube channels. That'd be way better in my opinion. But in any case, is there anything else that came to mind, like any questions or like concepts related to religion, and like how it relates to like causing like surveillance of thought, or how it may encourage people to believe in things, like believe that things are true, even if they're recognizably false or a lie, because it would be useful for them to believe they're true, ultimately recognizing that there are such things as useful lies, which encourages lying. I don't know. I probably won't stream too much longer on this topic, but I might start. I probably will close the stream on this topic and then start on another topic in another stream. probably going off of something that we talked about in this one. So if you subscribe to the channel, then you'd be notified immediately that we go live on this stream. So that would work too. But I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'll wait a couple of minutes before closing it, and then if there's like anything else that you wanted to talk about related to those, then we can. Yeah. Basically, what you're pointing to is you're making so you're saying basically what you believe is that morality comes from a uh, is tied to religion in some way, which is fair. Often, for most people, it is. And without that, I do believe there is a risk of people no longer constraining their action out of fear of the consequences or anything like that. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that we should immediately all just become atheists and then be secular and then create secular ethics and everything else. I'm just saying that we have to be it will be an incremental process by which we evolve our thinking about ethics and the need for God and whether it's true. And and I don't think that atheists necessarily are any more likely to become child molesters or murderers or anything like that. I think that there are very secular ways of being ethical. Like in my case, I just have a respect for other people, and so even if I'm an atheist, I will respect their rights and their dignity and their property and everything else because they're a human being and they have dignity. I think because of that, and I think that philosophically that could be justified. And it's I just don't think that there's a necessity of a god in that process of being moral. That and I'm not assuming authority or anything like that in saying that. I'm just trying to make the best decision outside of a religious framework and try to calculate all the value that I would either create or destroy with a particular decision and how it affects others and myself in the process. And then I come to a conclusion. Um, yeah, and people identify themselves with their religion too, which ultimately also becomes very limiting for people. Um, but yeah, morality doesn't necessarily have to come from a divine source. Um, it can simply be assumed as valid, right? Um, I mean, nothing should simply be assumed valid, obviously, but by default. But there are, in various ways, we can create a secular. I think that we could at least try, at the very least, to try to create a secularly based ethical system so that people are people use religion, it seems to me, to imbue their actions with divine authority. So what they'll end up doing is just acting selfishly and with self-interest, but they'll say, "Oh, but God said that it was good, so I'm right." Or it's a very easy way to end an argument when you can simply say that God said I'm right. Or it's a very easy way for a tyrant to say that he's right because God said he is. You see, all of these things it's a very convenient way of being able to justify yourself, to be able to say that, "Oh, my God said that I'm right. So, and I have divine approval, so you can't argue against me." There's no argument you could present against divine approval. And so, um, you know, it's it's an effective way of persuading and manipulating other people into your position, to accept your position and your supposed authority. Um, yeah, our laws are secular for the most part. They you still have to swear on the Bible when giving testimony before a court, and you a lot of laws are based on religious feelings, like pro-life positions, and well, pro-life is an obvious one where religion comes into the mix, which you can't really legislate on that. Separation of church and state's kind of an issue there. So if we're going to legislate based on morals, religious on the will of the church, then you're violating that principle. It seems to me that pro-life positions are swearing on that Bible is interesting. Swearing on that particular Bible is weird. Yes, and um, and then swearing on the Bible or swearing at all seems weird to me because if you lie in front of the court, it's a crime. So you don't have to swear at all. You can simply be constrained by the fact that it's a crime, not wanting to commit a crime. Yeah, and why should an atheist swear on the Bible? You know. So yeah, it's not as entangled as you might think. Although it is, but it's not. It's not. It's not a lost cause, is what I'm saying. One doesn't depend upon the other. Morality doesn't depend upon religion, nor does government. But that goes without saying. That's a simple way of putting it, I guess. Uh, you can only rely on religion for morality, not moral truth. So we have to distinguish between what they regard as right and then what is really right. I mean, we're getting into ethics here, which is always a very. The only reason I like thinking about ethics is because it's a area of discovery because we haven't yet reduced it to a science. So, and it's all about the logic of the rules that you create in ethics, and that's interesting to me. How we can optimize the rules to make them better and more and make more sense, um, or just do away with them. You know. Now there are certain rules, right? I mean, that we don't even need religion for. We have laws for, right? So, thou shalt not kill. Okay, well, you can tell me that, but the state already tells me not to do it, and they're gonna execute me if I do. So why would I? I don't need your I don't need your encouragement. I mean, we can control how people behave with laws. No, I mean, why do we need religion to control how people behave? Why can't we just use laws? Yeah, right. We can blame terrorism on religion, right? I mean, certain forms of it, anyway. Um, Sorry, yes, only certain forms of it. I'm not saying all of it. That was not being very precise there. I feel atheists spend too much time trying to disprove religion or blame societies. Um, well, they kind of have to, because the burden of proof is assumed to be on the atheist rather than on the theist, and that's actually not proper. The burden of proof should be on the person making the claim. It's not my obligation to prove that he doesn't exist. It's your obligation to prove that he does. And look, I mean, I don't really, as an atheist, I don't spend all my time doing that, and I really don't care, honestly, if it ends up being true or not. Because I mean, it may be in some sense, right? I mean, no one is a complete atheist in the sense that you're an atheist on a spectrum. It's not a binary atheist non-atheist. It's you go from theist to agnostic to atheist, and that's the traditional like 6 point spectrum. I'm not exactly sure how many points there are on that spectrum, but I can tell you it's not really relevant to me how whether it ends up being true because I don't believe that I even have the faculties. You said earlier that we can't know, so then why speculate about there being a God? If we can't know, then why do we claim to know? So if you say that we can't know, then why would you claim? I mean, maybe you're not saying that, and I'm not saying that you are. I'm just saying there's a bit of an irony there. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, hmm, yeah, but I'm not trying to disprove it. I think it disproves itself ultimately, and I don't need to try to disprove it or anything. But um, I care more about like if it's dangerous or not for humans to believe in those types of things. And I'm not trying to like demonize people that believe in it because they're often genuinely good people that do. And but yeah, that's the thing. Atheists should not demonize theists. That's not a very good strategy for. Um, Maybe I am doing that, but at least not. At least with a little bit more tact. I just yeah, I agree. I mean, neither side should demonize the other or go to extremes or straw man or anything like that. I mean, there should be a serious debate about it, but um, oh, okay, wait, I didn't see those. Yeah, wars are fought over resources, and they're also fought over principles too. Can we? I'm not sure. I think the foot soldiers may have their minds persuaded by religion, but the leaders. Yeah, it's the Seneca idea, right? So it's like I think Seneca. There's a quote by that whatever I don't know. I think it was Seneca or Cicero or one of those I don't know, one of those guys, saying that like the leaders regard religion as useful, the people as true, and the wise as false, which I think is true. I think that's a good quote. Did you see? I didn't see the Book of Eli. Um, the antagonist did not believe in God, but he used the Bible to control people. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, yeah. But see, a God wouldn't really give a shit about control or anything like that. It would have control because it's a God, so it's all powerful. So it wouldn't care about needing to assert itself or trying to control human behavior. It would have the ultimate control because it's a God. It's all powerful. So it depends on how you define God. There are various ways you could define that term that ultimately end up negating. Sorry, I cannot say it was God. Yeah. Yeah, but you can't say it was God, but what you'd call it a God or whatever. That's, I mean, it depends on how you use that word. Um, I'm a little bit, as even if I am an atheist, I'm a little bit more inclined to be agreeable with the other side. But that's because I don't really think it's effective to try to convince someone by just insulting them or being offensive or dismissive of. But what else would make sense but to accept it as God? Recognizing that it could be accidental or um, not God. It could be a demon too. I mean, Descartes posed the idea that what if it's a demon and it's not a benevolent force that is. So how can you say it isn't the devil? You know, I mean, I found that pretty. Um, I found that pretty convincing counterposition there. Um, the only logical belief is agnostic, probably, which you were very unagnostic about. Yes. Um, yeah. Um, yeah. But the whole point about the only truly logical belief is agnostic. Uh, that's I think you can be an atheist and be logical too, and you can also, well, it depends on what anecdotal experience you have. But what if God reveals Himself to you? What if like a person? So assuming I don't believe He exists, but again, I don't have to say that. But what if to an individual God literally like physically reveals Himself? What are you? And you know you have evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that it wasn't a hallucination or anything like that, which you couldn't prove. It could you could just say it's a hallucination, you know. But yeah, if I experienced that, I would just say I was hallucinating. Or, but what if it wasn't? What if I've never hallucinated before and I don't have any hallucinate? I don't have any. If I'm not schizophrenic or anything like that, how can I say it was a hallucination? You know. Um, so if it's not a hallucination or anything like that, it just happens to be anecdotally true for you individually that God revealed Himself physically and that He was there and everything. Well, then you'd have to. I mean, if it's convincing evidence of that, then you'd have to believe. I just don't believe that happens. I don't believe that kind of revelation never occurs legitimately. And if people claim it does, I think that's probably a lie. But I have the right to be able to claim that because it's possible from my perspective, and it's legitimate for me to think that. I mean, there are 1,000 wannabe messiahs that are going to say that God revealed themselves, that God revealed, you know. I've never, even when I was younger and believed, I never had any like I could feel all of the feelings that people would describe as God, but I don't think that I was skeptical of it since I was a kid. I did not see God, only that God made me a believer. It was tied into something else. Right? Yeah. I mean, people on like psychedelics and stuff like that have experiences they would describe as God or so spiritually powerful that it ends up they end up calling it that. I've never experienced anything that I would call God. Never. And maybe that's just a problem with me. That's not necessarily a superior. You know, it could be that I'm the one with brain damage, and um, I was the human that has the defect. I wasn't born with the God part of my brain. Maybe I'm the weird one. I still think I still think I'm right about God not existing. It may also be true that I just happen to be I happen to be one of the humans that didn't get the God part of the brain. Still, though, I don't think it's a defect. I think, you get my point, right? I mean, um, I don't think it's a part of the brain either. I don't think God comes from a part of the brain. Um, the theory of the bicameral mind states that um, ancient man heard his own voice as God's voice, and when man developed, yeah, exactly, yeah, exactly. But unlike a lot of theists, you actually admit that it doesn't come down to a logical argument for you personally. Whereas a lot of theists are simply, I mean, yeah, but again, are going to say they rely on faith. Maybe I'm misspeaking. A lot of theists are just going to say, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter about logic. It doesn't matter. Faith is what guides me to my belief. Um, you're not exactly saying that, though. You're not. You're not really appealing to faith there. That's not an obvious appeal to faith. Yes, I just accept my belief. Yeah, I guess that is faith. Your particular faith, your particular format, right? Your particular form of faith is not typical. Most theists tend to be a little bit more aggressive with their faith-based claims or the importance of faith, which is to me equally dangerous. I mean, the idea that it's pretty much to admit that you lost the argument to have to say that you have to rely on faith, right? I mean, if you just have to say, yeah, well, okay, it's about faith, well then you're kind of admitting that the that the argument's been won on the other side. You're just choosing to continue on faith. Um, was written by a schizophrenic or people on psychedelics or something like that. Yeah. A lot of the descriptions of the angels and stuff like that end up being kind of like hallucinations. And it could have all stemmed from a hallucination, right? I mean, the idea of a burning bush and all of that, I mean, those types of visual metaphors end up either being hallucinations or psychosis. Yeah, your logical mind prevents you from doing it at that level. Yeah. Um, I mean, I can easily see that all of this came about through just contingent biological and chemical and physical processes, and I can see evolution being the primary, a very very physical, a scientific materialist explanation being totally adequate. I don't see any issue there. Given enough time, anything could evolve. A monkey on a typewriter could write a Shakespearean play given enough time. You just have to think in terms of infinite time, you know. And people are I love this point made in one of the atheist interviews. It's like people are baffled by the idea that evolution occurs, but they're willing to accept that Jonah was stuck in the belly of a giant fish and that truth was revealed by a burning bush. And that I love that point. I think that's a good way of. But regardless, um, it's also possible. You acknowledge though that it's possible. It's certainly possible that it's not real. You see, that's the difference I'm detecting there, because a lot of people they won't acknowledge that it's possible that it's not real. So that's a little bit more rare. They won't acknowledge that at all. They will flatly deny that that's a possibility. But the way that you define God is actually very different too. The idea that it's some sort of like simulator or we're in a simulation is a way that I've thought about it too. um, I still don't believe it, but I think that's one of the better ways of framing the issue that leads to a more clarified debate about what it possibly is, what God possibly is, and what we mean by God. In which case, I have to be agnostic, because the possibility of, if I am to admit that your definition of God is perfectly plausible, then I would have to fall into the agnostic category on the issue of a simulation, because to say that it's a simulator is to cause me. So Yeah, supernatural, I can say no. Simulation, I have to say maybe. So it makes me agnostic rather than, so no, being atheist, supernatural, right? So if you say that it's supernatural, I say no, I'm an atheist. If you say that it's a simulation, I say maybe, in which case I'm an agnostic. In less than 500 years, humans will undoubtedly have the technology that would convince our current society that, uh, I think God is um, consciousness. I think they're the same thing. Um, the idea comes from consciousness, and it could be the same thing. But that we're getting into some deep. That's actually the Hegelian idea. That's what Hegel. Sorry, that sounds a bit pretentious. It's the I when I'm thinking about something, I'll sometimes pull on like historical examples of. I'm talking about the philosopher. It's like Hegel. I'm not sure if it's Hegel or Hegel. I think it's Hegel. Um, Thought that consciousness was God or something like that. But no, I don't think we'll ever reach a point in technology where necessarily we will have where we will become. Well, we may reach a point in technology where we become godlike. We may already be godlike in many ways. Well, we're not yet. Anyway, certainly not yet. We're too limited, even with our technology. Yeah, actually, I think your point was a little bit more subtle than that. Exactly. Exactly. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I get what you're saying. Um, the idea that, um, yeah, it's like taking a cell phone back to the 1700s as a time traveler to the past. They think it's magic, or they think it's God or something like that. Yeah, we already do heal people in pretty miraculous ways. Weather, in many ways, we can control, right? Because if we can improve the climate, if we can control the climate, which we do every day when we destroy it, then we have control over the weather in some very loose, indirect sense that is not exactly what you are getting for. We actually can control the weather in ways, though. Um, we can spew seawater into the air off the coast of some Atlantic area, and you can create clouds that way. Creating those clouds then blocks the sunlight, which cools the planet, hence controlling the weather. But we can't just like make it rain, at the snap of a fingers or anything like that. But yeah, I get your point. Less direct control, but still control of it nonetheless. Earthquakes. Um, Here's the thing with controlling the weather and earthquakes. We, uh, I have to think about that more actually. Earthquakes, I'm not sure about. I know that we can cause earthquakes. I don't know if that we can stop earthquakes. If there's, I mean, yeah, um, we can definitely cause earthquakes with various drilling methods and stuff like that. I know. I can't. You can't even imagine. That's what they call the singularity. I mean, um, yeah, cause earthquakes. Yeah, I think that's an yeah. Um, and if we can prevent them, if we can stop causing them, we can prevent them. And so in that sense, we can control whether they happen, which is what you meant. And control weather. We can't stop bad weather, but we can create the conditions that then lead to better weather, in which case we both control weather and earthquakes. This is a very I love the idea in Family Guy, like getting us back to the topic of religion. Because I mean, the title of the video is just religion, right? I mean, we can play around in this huge broad area and play around with a bunch of other hypotheticals because that's my worry. Is when I title the videos, I'm just like, I want to make sure that you know, staying on point, so that it doesn't just become a tangent fest. But um, there's an idea in Family Guy: where would humanity be without religion? In terms of scientific advancement and artistic advancement. Well, maybe not artistic advancement. We wouldn't have any of the Renaissance, religion-inspired Renaissance art or anything like that. Or would we be scientifically, though? Or if there's any difference at all, probably none. Probably very little or negligible. I'm not sure there was any point at which religion directly impeded scientific or technological advancement in a direct way. Could have done it indirectly. But proving that there's a direct link between two things is much harder than indirect. Oh. Anyway, yeah, I just mean the kinds of thinking and ideologies that are created by religion end up being more of a danger to society than a benefit. And if not already, I mean, we've only been around, we've only had these types of systems, and we've only had, you know, we're still only a couple hundred years post Enlightenment. We're probably still in the Enlightenment. I mean, we speak as if we've had a ton of time to experiment with all these different options in terms of systems, both ethical, political, philosophical. We haven't really been thinking that long like this, abstractly or in a critical way. We haven't really been doing it long enough to have made significant advancements. We're about where we should be, I think, with what we are and what we evolved from and how history is played out in various ways. But oh yeah, I think about that too, right? So I don't know if Wade, you're into MBTI at all. I'm not sure how much you're into MBTI. Um, there's this concept. There's another YouTuber who he has this framework of thinking about thinking, and there's a certain type of thinking that assumes a frame and operates within a frame and does not question the validity of the frame, and then applies the assumptions that are inherent in the frame, and then uses the frame to generate more conclusions and make progress. And then there's another way of thinking that questions frames and questions rules, and then um, questions is a little bit more of a both a self and ideationally and well, yeah. So it's one assumes a frame and then one questions it. But um, you're saying working within society to change the society, not just completely overturning it, which is the only way that change could come about in a civilized way. That's the only good way to go about it. Yeah. I think most people that really front with their atheism and only focus on that topic end up not being very productive. Um, uh, it's, I think once you've thought about it long enough, like if you're like an atheist, like teen, and you're discovering yourself and stuff, it's like that. It's fun to think about and go through all the different. And I know that I'm kind of hypocritical in making the topic of the video about this in a religion critical way. Um, I'm kind of engaging in that. But it's still an interesting topic to think about from these dimensions. I don't think the video ended up being about just criticizing religion on kind of the bases that um, I tried at least to front with a like more of a psychological or practical argument about why religion is or certain types of religious thinking are not bad. And I was very specific, right? The utility of thinking that there are useful falsehoods, and that's more what I'm talking about. Um, Rather than like just criticizing religion. Oh, of course, I have criticized religion a lot, but I mean, and it needs to be criticized on numerous bases because it's very dangerous if left unchecked and unquestioned. But you know, yeah, changing their beliefs is a fool's errand. You're not going to achieve that. Yeah. Um, yeah. Right. And atheists could say that, yeah, like you that thinking about why religion is invalid is their way of advancing the human species. And I don't know what you think about that. I think that it can be, depending on how they talk about atheism. Um, you know, they would see religion as limiting the human species, and they would see they're talking about and thinking about atheism as advancing it. And I think questioning how we've done things and whether it's good, logical, or right, ends up being a very good way to advance knowledge, if not the species, right? But I think that's the point that you're getting at. So it does advance knowledge, maybe, and it does advance thought, but does it advance the species? There is a distinction there. And oftentimes advancements in thought and in philosophy and all that, that's great. I mean, especially in philosophy, it ends up becoming very general and inapplicable in most contexts, which I have a hard time accepting that because I think it is always relevant. But you're talking about using human intelligence to just go about like doing the practical work of actually making advancements. Oh yeah, it's a low level action to just encourage people to be open minded. You know, it may be a high level action to then explain why being open minded is a good thing. But mere encouragement without explanation ends up being very not useless, but yeah, it's more low level, I think, relative to something like what Elon Musk is doing, right? Yeah, sure. It depends on your personality, right? Because um, so you're demonstrating a concern with, you know, measurable advancement, and that's I was going to say it's good. It has its purpose. Probably is a good thing if we were to think about it. Um, you also need people that are serving other roles, though. We all have a role to fill, and you know, not everyone can be an Elon Musk, and so you have to have mothers, and you have to have artists, and you have to have people that do service work and labor and stuff like that. People that do mental labor. There's personality is so diverse. Not everyone can fit into a single role. We have to definitely ensure that our roles are suited to our personalities, I guess. At least that's my view, because I don't think people can just adopt a role that's not suited to their personality. We could debate that though. I know. Yeah. Yeah. I have a friend who's very smart, and he's very very smart, and he's and he he works at McDonald's, but he's in college, and it's not his. He's not. There's nothing wrong with it, right? It's just a college job. But I get your point. Like, we should try to um, be as productive as we can. I guess. I mean, I have a hard time doing that, but it's probably ultimately better for us to have that impetus. I would find that like doing. I know I did my share of service work. It was absolutely horrible and very, very boring. Yeah, it was very boring. Um, I don't even see why anyone would want to do it. I don't think anyone does. A lot of people that I found in those jobs end up being there because they have to be. It's very unfortunate. For various reasons, it's a necessity of their particular moment in life. But no one makes a career out of it. Very few people will make a career out of it. It's always to serve a need. It's not a career trajectory. People are usually doing that kind of work just to serve a need. But that gets off the point of it. In any case, yeah. But thinking about why religion is bad or dangerous or whether it is any of those things on its face. Yeah. Um, uh, I watch like the Atheist Experience too on YouTube. You might have watched them. That show. It's based out of Houston. Uh, they are very aggressive atheists, and they are very like they can be very like people will make points and then they'll just shut them down. Or I don't think that's a very good approach per se. But I went through a phase like that though too. So anyway, um, it's just funny to think about how myopic religion can be too. It's like we're worrying about whether some guy masturbates or whether two gay men get married or um, uh, whether a woman terminates a bundle of cells in her uterus. And like you said, it's like Elon Musk is, while other people are debating about that stuff, Elon Musk is sending rockets to Mars. There's a bigger world outside of all of those religious debates, and that's why I like sci-fi or stuff like that, because it opens my mind to like, oh, okay, humanity could go somewhere where we're not debating these things, and we're actually um, doing big things, I guess, or exploring the universe or something like that. I don't know. Um, yeah, yeah. It's a very secular. It's it should be decided purely on a secular basis. Is my point. Abortion, but it's decided on non-secular bases. Yeah. Uh, I mean, the whole abortion debate. I mean, religion has tainted the entire way of thinking about, and it really hasn't. It's not religion that's tainting the discussion. It's those that. So it's the Christian. It's Christianity and the Christians. Who do you blame Christianity or do you blame the Christians? And um, with uh, so I can't just say it's Christianity as a whole. It may just be Christians that believe that particular thing about abortion and they're pro-life for other reasons other than the text. It may not be canon to be. I don't know if there's any canon that says anything about abortion. I don't even think they had the. Is there? Like, is it canon in Christianity that abortion is? I would assume that it is. Otherwise, why would Christians say that it is? But I've never heard a verse or a specific citation to the text that links Christianity with a pro-life position. I even think it supports it, from what I understand, in certain instances. Bible say anything about abortion? I just want a yes or no answer, but I'm getting articles. I'll just add yes or no. Yeah, no, they're not going to give you. There's no way Google is going to be able to give you a yes or no answer on that. That's hilarious that you mentioned that. Abraham was going to sacrifice his own son. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yep. I mean, even God told him to sacrifice his own son. You know, that was a requirement. Of course, he then withheld and said that you shouldn't, but still. And God did kill the firstborns too in that one particular. So I'm not sure how much he values infant life if he's willing to kill the firstborns and whatever. But killing the firstborns is not killing an infant, right? I mean, that's just killing the firstborns. So I guess I'm misconstruing them. Yeah, I don't think it's killing a child, and I don't even think it's killing. I neither think it's killing nor killing a child. I neither think it's killing nor a child. Um, killing like late term abortion. Maybe we could have a debate about that. There may be exceptions there that would be totally valid. I may even agree with. But midterm, I don't even think there's any capacity to feel pain in the early term. Yeah, that's fine. No, it's you don't have to agree. And I, probably didn't put that very delicately. Uh, yeah, yeah. I mean, early term, right? I don't think Plan B is abortion or anything like that. I don't think the blast. I don't think the. I don't think a zygote is a child, and I don't. But I mean, I bet we could have debates about. Yeah, it's not about religion. Right? Exactly. Right. Exactly. That's the problem with the pain exception. Right. Um, we can kill someone if it doesn't cause them any pain. Precisely. Precisely. That most certainly gets at the problem with what I'm saying. Certainly. Um, uh, you know, and that's totally valid. We had a discussion. Yeah, I've definitely made that mistake and then had that response thrown at me before. Yeah. Well, I think the best moral argument is it's a potential human being, and you're preventing that from coming into existence. And I think that's a pretty compelling way of putting it. But um, I still think that there's a difference between something becoming something else, something potentially being something else, and then something being that thing. Um, we wouldn't say that a tadpole is a frog, right? We would say it's a tadpole, but we still may say that a tadpole is something that it should not be aborted. I mean that's only to say that it's not a frog. It's just to say that it's a tadpole. In which case, a tadpole may be something that you're totally willing to protect from abortion. Um, but yeah, this is a moral. This is moral. Yeah, um, I think there. I think again, like I said, late term abortion, there may be a moral question, and maybe even some forms of midterm abortion with certain. But early term abortion, Plan B, and stuff like that, there may be a moral argument to be made there. But for the most part, I think that yeah, I don't know. It's actually the whole abortion debate is very difficult for me to come to a conclusion on. Um, I um, I don't have very clearly distilled. I don't have very clear views on it because of that. I wouldn't say that I'm like an advocate. I'm not a pro-choice advocate or anything like that. I recognize that there is an argument on both sides. Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's murder. I don't know if it is it that when did she? Yeah, I won't ask the details, but um, yeah, that was an argument posed to me recently too, which is that the mother is not the only one with an interest in that thing's life, right? Um, there may be conjoined interests there where you have a yeah, yeah. I mean the yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a serious. It's definitely a serious issue. It's definitely one where you can't make any definitive statements outright. I mean, it's on one side you're protecting a life, on the other side it's about women's rights. So it just depends on what you value more, and that's entirely a matter of your own values. And it's not something that is resolved via any principle, right? This is not an issue I think that is resolved via reference to any sort of clear principle of logic or anything like that. I think this is an unfortunate issue that is fraught with a lot of complexity, both moral and practical. Um, yeah, yeah. I don't want to get too deep into it because it's like I think it's a very emotionally charged issue, and I don't really I don't like those per se. But yeah, uh, I mean, like, okay, so I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't think that it's that simple either, though. Um, I think there are two sides to it still. I wouldn't even say that I necessarily lean pro-choice. I mean, I do lean pro-choice, but I wouldn't say that I'm like I lean pro-choice, but I wouldn't say that I'm not pro-life because I don't really. Yeah, and I also wouldn't say that I'm pro-life either. Um, I don't know. I don't like. I don't. That topic is legitimately difficult, though. Even from any perspective. I mean, a smarter person could probably come up with a more a better uh, you know answer than I could. I see it as a complex issue that is not very easily solved. Um, so yeah, it doesn't. I mean, most well, not all acts of ending a life are murder, though. But I also, um, if I drugged a woman that caused an abortion, then what? It would depend on a number of other factors that I wouldn't really easily be able to tell you. I wouldn't be able to necessarily give you a. If I drugged a woman that caused an abortion, then what? That would be wrong. If you would want me to simplify my thinking on it, I would say that would be that I would regard that as wrong to do such a thing. Not necessarily because I believe that I think drugging anyone is wrong. It causing the death of her child, if she regards it as a child, if she regards it as, um, yeah, I'd say that's very wrong. Especially if it's not. I mean, yeah, I mean, no, I mean, no. There's no justifying that on any grounds, ethically speaking. At least in my view. Yeah, no, I'm not saying no. I'm not saying that. No, I'm not saying it's okay. Certainly. Uh, that's because oh no, but no, not you drugging a woman. No, so these are very different. Okay, so I need to be more clear here, right? I'm probably treating the issue, a controversial issue, a little bit too cavalierly. uh, Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, it does. But see, I do think the term. This is the thing. This particular issue, you ask me about anything else, I would be able to tell you exactly what I think about it. But this issue, I am just not sure. I can't give you a sure answer on this one. You know. So I will very comfortably admit that I simply don't know on this one. Um, This is one of these weird. Okay, so I would say that I'm a situational ethicist, which is to say that I believe that morality is often very situational, and what's right in any given context is very situational. So what you're doing here is you're posing like equivalent contexts, that you're arguing are equivalent. So you're saying that if I would say this, then I would say this. And anytime you attempt to do that in a debate, it ends up going really badly because, oftentimes I'm not saying that. Uh, no, I don't think that. I'm not. No, I don't think that killing a baby is ever a good thing. I don't. No. Um, um, yeah, no. I mean, that's certainly not a good thing. Um, but the debate is about whether. Then it just comes down to whether it's a baby at any given term. And early term, no, I don't think that's a baby yet. Like very early term, you're talking moment of conception. It's not a baby. That's not an infant. Um, she did terminate what could have been a potential life. Yes. Um, and we can have we'd have to have a debate about how the father's interests are involved in this whole issue, and that's not really talked about. Um, I mean, that's genuine. It's just not discussed very. It's not the first thing that people talk about when they're talking about abortion. So, um, you know, um, but you have to understand my approach, even to these kinds of serious ethical questions, is more to just try to see if I can get an answer logically. That's just how I. But yeah, I don't think that killing is. I wouldn't. I mean, look, I don't even need to say that. Killing is never. Um, rarely justified, even for adults and fully developed humans. Um, the death penalty is, well, that could even be argued against, but in that case, the state can kill a person, right? So, and killing in that sense is justified. Um, but no, it's almost never justified ethically by any conventional moral standard, and rarely circumstances justify that kind of an act. But the question does come down to whether that thing in her womb is again, I don't like touching upon this issue too much, but it's whether that thing is a child or something like that is the question. Um, and I think at a late term, it definitely, uh, it seems to be, probably is, definitely is. So I'm willing to make an allowance that at that point, yeah, it probably would not be justified. Even then, the consent of the father may need to be involved. Willing to allow that. Um, Midterm, I'm not exactly sure when the fetus becomes when the fetus becomes an infant. I mean, we don't know. We simply don't know yet. Um, we can't measure that yet. So once we can measure that, then I can tell you. But yeah, on that particular topic, it's our ignorance about how we define things, and not how we define things, but what the fetus constitutes as a child or a human being is the debate, and it's a very difficult one to. It's actually, you know, to me, it's not too difficult to distinguish between. Um, too difficult to distinguish between. Well, it's at an early stage. It's easy to distinguish between what is an infant and what is a fetus. I mean, when it's just a very an early development. But no, no. That's the thing is, it's not really. It doesn't necessarily like. Again, we talked about this. Um, you have to consider there are like seriously difficult moral questions that we have to reckon with. They're very difficult to answer, and the mere act of questioning a whether it is killing is not to say that so for me to question in essence for me to question whether it's an act of killing or murder or something like that is not to say that I would do it. you know I'm simply questioning if it is. you know um Not encouraging it. Right. By questioning something, is it this or is it not this? You're not making any kind of a statement. You're just questioning whether it is or it isn't. So you're not supporting either side. You're simply asking, you're simply asking a question. You're not committing to an answer. So to question whether it ends up being uh, is a legitimate act of murder, right? Because it may be killing you. I mean, in certain stages, you may be able to say that it's that, but it becomes a difficult question to resolve because we just simply don't know. Um, that's why I just dislike that issue for the most part because there's no easy there. You can't simply come to a conclusion. Um, we just don't know the point at which one thing becomes something else. We can't measure that, so we can't come to an easy conclusion on that. I mean, no. Like that's the like being a moral relativist doesn't make you any more likely to commit any kind of crime. It just means that you're willing to seriously consider whether what we conventionally consider good or bad is actually good or bad. It doesn't mean that you commit to doing bad. It means you just question whether it's actually bad. Um, and because you analytically go about deciding what is good or bad, when you do act, when you do good, you've done so for good reason, rather than simply doing good by default. So I just look at questioning the moral legitimacy of something as a part of being good. Like the most important part of being good is questioning why it's good and then committing to it only after you've decided that it's good, right? That it's legitimately good. Um, if you simply do good, not knowing that it's good because you haven't thought about it, then I wouldn't regard that as good. I would regard that as hazarding on a tradition or a guess, which is not good. And taking a shortcut. So it's no. And it's the Jordan Peterson kind of argument like, oh, atheists are more likely to commit these types of crimes because they're moral relativists and that they consider things too independently. No, not even close. Um, not even close. Uh, the maybe for some, maybe in certain cases, a moral relativist, if they're a genuinely bad person, if you could even say what's a bad person, maybe if they become a moral relativist, then maybe they do commit those types of acts because they're a moral relativist. But for most genuinely good people that wouldn't do such things, you wouldn't have to have the debate about whether they would do it, because anyway, moral relativism does not have to produce moral or legal crime. A person being a moral relativist questioning, so this relates back to the abortion issue, because you're basically saying, it's like the mind of a killer questioning whether the killing is a killing and whether it's murder and everything else. If my thinking were more refined about this, then I would be able to give you a more definitive response. But even moral relativists can value the life of humans, and they're willing to. That would include young children and infants as well. It's just the question of whether the fetus has become a human is the question, and it's a legitimate question up to a certain point. And that's all I'm saying. No, it's not. It's a very similar belief to you justifying abortion. No, I mean, it's just questioning whether it is or isn't abortion, whether it is or isn't an unethical act of killing, or if it even is killing per se. I mean, these words have very specific definitions, and you can only activate, you can only, whether something is defined, whether the fetus is defined as this morally relevant thing, like a child would be naturally, then it's a legitimate question. I think that's a perfectly legitimate question, and it may be one that's easier to resolve in your mind, but I think it's not a malicious question either. To ask whether it is or isn't murder is not it doesn't come from a place of malice. It just comes from a place of trying to actually get at the accurate. It comes from a place of accuracy seeking rather than malice. That is not malicious or malintentioned or anything like that. Well, let's say if the law gave men a right to have a woman terminate a pregnancy because the man did not want the child. Well, I think that you contradicted yourself a little bit, because then you're saying that then the man's interest. So you're saying that. Okay, wait. So basically, you're saying, what would women say if the law gave men the right to have women terminate a pregnancy because the man did not want the child? I was fully willing to allow that. That both of their interests are relevant. So, yeah, I was fully willing to allow that. I have no problem with thinking that a man's interests are as relevant as the woman's. However, a woman is the one that needs to carry the pregnancy to term. You have to remember that too. So she has a greater she has a greater burden in that reproductive process too. So yes, his interests do matter. I think they are relevant. But she bears the burden of pregnancy. He doesn't. So I think that has to be taken into consideration too. So yeah, the man's interest, certainly I'm willing to allow that the male counterpart in that exchange and the creation of that thing is relevant. But you have to remember that the woman does bear the greater reproductive burden, because she has to carry the term to pregnancy and then do all of the motherly duties associated with raising a child, which the man will have no part in for the most part, even if he will play the fatherly role, which is fine. But he doesn't actually have to carry the pregnancy to term. He doesn't have that burden. So that's why. No, I would disagree. I would disagree. I would say that in the case that she wants to terminate, he doesn't, then her word should be weighted greater, because she has the greater burden, reproductive burden. But his word should be taken into account. I would only say that. I wouldn't commit to that position. I would only say that. Yeah, termination rights, right? Um, and when those become applicable, and how far they reach. Um, hmm, hmm. That's a good. See, that's good. That's good. That. It's. I guess it was useful for me to think about this issue because what if he wants to terminate and she doesn't, right? I don't know. It's hard. If their interests conflict, how do we decide? How do we decide? You're asking a question that can't be answered, which is why I said I don't know. Yeah, yeah. It's not fair to force her to carry, and that's the point, right? It's getting a little bit late, so I'm kind of forgetting my positions on things honestly as I get a little bit more tired, but having to think about them with the entire thinking about them like I'm thinking about them for the first time. Um, but yes, no, I thought about that in the past. It leads to a world if you enforce protection of the fetus. It does lead to a world where you're forcing a woman to carry to term. And that was the main issue that I identified when I thought about the issue in the past, and I probably came to the pro-choice position because of that. Now I'm a little bit more uncertain, I think, about how I identify. But I don't know. I mean, if the woman can terminate, I mean, you're basically arguing for um, yeah. I mean, these situations where their interests conflict, I don't know how you would resolve that conflict. That would be, um, what you're going to flip a coin. It seems to be a pretty important decision, so you can't just. I mean, when the interests of the man and the woman conflict, because if they don't conflict, he wants to terminate, she does, it's terminated. He doesn't want to terminate, she doesn't want to terminate, it's not. It's only when they conflict that this becomes a relevant issue. So to ask that question ends up. Um, well, generally in the process of pregnancy, the man doesn't really have too much of a burden. Yeah, yeah, right. Um, yeah, the burden of having the child and everything else. So we shouldn't force the woman to bear the burden, right? Um, uh, and then exactly right. So it's about how we impose burdens. So in the instance that in the instance right that he wants to terminate and she doesn't, right? If we allow her to carry to term, right, we impose a burden on him. So in that case, the mechanics of how that would work out could ultimately lead to me probably maybe even making the decision that we should terminate. Because yes, it does impose the burden on the man. And I would agree. Applying that principle equally, I would agree with you. Yeah, yeah. And what you're talking about is an instance where he wants to terminate and she doesn't, right? Where I've kind of tried to provide the solution there, which is that yes, but then you'd force her to terminate, which is a burden, a psychological burden, because then she has to terminate the child, but she doesn't want to, which could traumatize her because then she's had to kill what she recognizes as her kid. So then, how do you resolve the burden problem, right? In the mechanics of imposing burdens, there's no easy solution. Yeah. Um, uh, yeah, that's pretty horrible. That's pretty awful. Yeah, and that's honestly like, yeah, yeah, um, yeah, and I guess that's one of the costs of having unsafe sex. And I don't. You probably didn't have unsafe sex, but when people do have unsafe sex, what happens is pregnancy results, and then we have to deal with all these complicated moral questions about how we deal with that. So we should we should then just practice. So then we should just say, let's avoid all of these debates and just practice safe sex, and then we don't have to have these moral debates. I mean, I'm sure that you did, but you get my point. It's because that people have unsafe sex that they don't use contraception or they take a risk that pregnancy results, and then they have to have these seemingly unresolvable, you know, arbitrational debates that are not easily resolved on either side. So that's one of the dangers too of having widespread abortion is if people think they can just get an abortion, then they don't have to practice safe sex because it's like, well, I could just have an abortion, so why do we need to use contraception, right? So, but people usually don't think, right? It's only a possible moral hazard. It doesn't have to be a necessary one. Yeah, yeah. So, and that's what. Yeah. See, that's yeah. The yeah. They definitely should take into account that there are two sides to the you know production of a fetus. They definitely should take that into account for sure. But in any case, um, I'm not exactly sure how the abortion issue links back to the original issues that we were talking about before. But actually, it's good to talk about this issue because it touches upon precisely what I was talking about, or something in the title, which is that you sort of uh, made the implication that what was it that um, moral relativism can like lead people to could lead people to do horrible things because they're not constrained by an objective morality. Um, and I I guess it touches back to the whole idea that there can't be a crime in thought, only in action. Um, and people are constrained by more than just religious morality. They have their own ethics that they develop too. You know, and I mean, even as an atheist, I definitely have my own set of principles and ethics that would then constrain my action. I wouldn't need the religion to. But in any case, that kind of vaguely touches upon the original topic of the video. The secular laws favor women unjustly. Um, yeah. Um, I think that the secular laws recognize that women have a huge part of the reproductive burden, and then they assume that women have the entire burden, which is not the case. Um, although they have most of the pregnancy burden, right? So women have that pregnancy burden that men don't have, but of course, then men have the fatherly, I guess the duty of then um, fatherly burden, I guess, of then so yeah, playing their part in that relationship, which is a burden as well. So it doesn't always just come down very neatly and cleanly to being able to sign to. So basically, what you're saying is it doesn't always come down neatly and cleanly to who bears the greater burden. There are burdens on both sides, and so they can't really be decided in that way. Um, at least it can't be decided on that only factor. It definitely can be decided if we take into account, a sufficient number of factors, all the relevant factors. I think you brought up abortion in the context of blaming religion. Oh, that seems logical. I don't exactly know how we got. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. We were talking about how atheists. Okay, so it started off with that about how atheists should spend more time focusing on other things or whatever. I'm not sure how that connected back. I'm not sure how we got here to um, abortion specifically, um, or how religion is so entangled in how we think about ethical issues. Yeah, yeah, I know. Yeah, I don't have a perfect transcript in my head of every specific, you know, um, point at which we transitioned in the discussion. But in any case, um, the I don't go to bed until it'll be probably soon. But in any case, yeah, we were talking about how religion has become entangled in how we think about ethical issues. So that leads to abortion, the topic of abortion, which becomes an ethical discussion. Yeah, in any case, I am going to end the stream at this point. So thank you for the viewers that stuck around. We had covered some interesting topics. Not all totally related and perfectly relevant to the titles, but relevant enough that it ended up still being both relevant and interesting. So I probably will still, yeah, it was a pretty interesting conversation. I probably will still, I don't think I'll stream tonight again. I certainly will be streaming tomorrow, though. I have a bunch of other things that I would want to talk about. And I'm trying to put more videos on this channel so that, I don't know, I can just mostly have conversations with people about interesting topics. So that's my primary motive for putting up these. In any case, I'm not exactly sure what I will stream about tomorrow, but they'll be random topics, so they'll be interesting. So yeah, I'll close out the stream right now, and then and then Wade, in the future, if you'd like to have other conversations about similar issues, then I'll maybe learn something more about uh, you know the forgetting words. Oh yeah, how to do the streaming thing, right? Yeah, yeah, how to do a stream where we I'm not sure how to add people to streams and stuff like that yet. So I'll figure that out. And then in the future, when I'm streaming, you can log in and we can maybe try that. All right, guys, I'm going to close out the stream. Have a good night.